That may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
Okay, very rarely do we get the chance to go through and actually look at some tight ends and go and talk about some undervalued players at the position, but that's exactly what we're going to be doing in this video. I'm going to be comparing my Patreon rankings to DLF ADP, and I'm going to see who do they have lower than, well, who I have. I mean, I think a perfect example is going to be someone like TJ Hawkinson, who I have at tight end 3, and I believe they have him as their tight end 6, tight end 7, something along that. We'll dive into it in just 1 second. But of course, before we get in there, please make sure you go down there, drop a like on this video. For the love of God. I mean, we used to get like 20% of the people watching this video to drop a like. That number has dwindled down and down and down. I feel like y'all are just forgetting. Please drop that like, subscribe to the channel if you have not done so already, and leave a comment. Let me know how stupid I am. And I think that should be it. Let's go through. Let's dive into a couple of these tight ends. Actually, right after, of course, you go join the flock on Patreon, where you can get an in-depth podcast breaking down your Dynasty team, get into Dynasty leagues with us, and at the same time, get access to all our Patreon rankings. There's a ton of stuff over there on Patreon. You can find the link down there in the description of the video. Now, let's get into it, and let's go over to a player that we already discussed in TJ Hawkinson. Now, with Hawkinson, if you pull up our rankings, yes, I did it. I moved TJ Hawkinson to tight end 3, and hear me out on this one. And I know a lot of people are not going to like this, and I have been a massive George Kittle fan in the past, but at this point, I think I may have to move Hawkinson over him. And this is something that I stared at for a very long time with our Patreon rankings. And I will say, I think George Kittle has shown us that he has access to a ceiling that very few players do in fantasy. But with George Kittle, he is going to be in a tough situation this upcoming year. With Trey Lance taking over for Jimmy Garoppolo as the quarterback for the 49ers. Now, y'all know I love me some Trey Lance. I mean, I think that Trey Lance is going to be a top 10 quarterback in fantasy for years and years and years. We talked about this all offseason last year based on his rushing upside, the situation he's stepping into, and the job security that he has with the level of investment the 49ers put him into. I mean, I think that Lance is going to crush. A big reason for that is going to be the rushing upside with Trey Lance. I think once they get to the red zone, Trey Lance is going to be vulturing a decent amount of rushing touchdowns. I think that also this team's going to continue to be a run-first offense, especially if they have a run-first quarterback. So I am worried about the volume overall with a tight end that I think is extremely talented in George Kittle. And also, a lot of people are going to be surprised to hear this, but George Kittle's going to turn 29 this upcoming season. Now, I have no idea how this is possible. I mean, he came out in that 2017 draft class, and I guess he stayed all 5 years at Iowa. I didn't know that, but I mean, he's going to be 29 years old this season, 28 years old currently. And if you're looking at the production this past year and comparing George Kittle to TJ Hawkinson, there's not a massive gap. I mean, this is a PPR format where you actually have George Kittle as the tight end 3 and TJ Hawkinson as the tight end 6 on a points per game basis this past season. And if you're looking at how TJ Hawkinson's offense should project going forward, I can't really see this getting any worse for TJ Hawkinson. I can't see this team having less talent to surround him. I can't see the quarterback playing being much worse than Jared Goff. I can't see the coaching staff. I think TJ Hawkinson, his situation has almost already hit rock bottom. And with TJ Hawkinson, he has been fantastic through the first 3 years of his NFL career. I think that a lot of people have kind of just forgotten how impressive it is for a tight end at 24 years old for TJ Hawkinson to come out and post damn near a top 5 tight end season this past year. And I mean, this is just a continual progression for TJ Hawkinson. I mean, if you go back to 2020 for Hawkinson, this is a tight end that was the tight end 5 on a points per game basis at 23. And if you're looking at 2019 as well, now this is a year that I want to say He sat out almost the entire season. He didn't. He played a decent amount where he did average 8 points per game in a tight end premium format. But you see that clear progression for an extremely young tight end prospect like TJ Hawkinson. And if we're talking about players that can jump up into that top tier of Kyle Pitts and Mark Andrews, I mean, I don't necessarily think George Kittle can get there. Because even if Kittle manages to come out and outproduce TJ Hawkinson this upcoming season, from a points per game perspective, how much more productive does George Kittle actually have to be for him to gain dynasty value on TJ Hawkinson? Because I think that even if Kittle comes out and averages 2 points per game more than TJ Hawkinson this upcoming season, and we're in next offseason, and all of a sudden you're looking at a 25-year-old TJ Hawkinson or a tight end coming on 30 in George Kittle, and the production's not that different, I think it's almost going to be consensus next year to have TJ Hawkinson over George Kittle. And I'm looking at the production as, a very similar range right now. So I'm already going to be willing to put George Kittle ahead of him. Now, of course, if you pull up our tiers on Patreon, our rankings on Patreon, they're all broken down into tiers. Like we have Kyle Pitts, we have Mark Andrews tier 1, and then tier 2, we have TJ Hawkinson, George Kittle, Darren Waller, and Travis Kelce. And if you look at what you have on DLF right now, you're going to see something similar. You get Kyle Pitts, Mark Andrews at the top 2 tight ends, but then that second tier of Kittle, Kelce, Darren Waller, TJ Hawkinson, Hawkinson's actually at the very bottom of that. And I think people have just underrated TJ Hawkinson, putting up back-to-back years as a mid tight end 1 in fantasy at 23 and 24 years old. And he was a top 10 NFL draft pick coming out in that 2019 draft class as well. He had a fantastic profile. So if you have an elite tight end prospect that comes in and posts 2 tight end 1 seasons before he turns 25, what else are we looking for? Sign me up. This is the next elite level tight end in TJ Hawkinson. Now, our next tight end is going to be someone that came from a draft class that nobody expected any of the tight ends to be good in, Cole Kmet. Now, with Cole Kmet, in that 2020 class, everybody was just expecting, including myself, that you weren't going to get a single name from there that was intriguing a few years down the road. Now, of course, Cole Kmet was that number 1 tight end out of Notre Dame, and he has also been pretty impressive through the first 2 years of his NFL career. And I think with Cole Kmet, that the situation can actually get better this upcoming season. Because if you're looking at the natural progression you had from 2020 to 2021, he had that massive jump up. He almost had double the amount of receptions. He went from 28 to 60. Of course, we have to change this all to a per game standpoint. But also, if you're looking at his receiving yards on a per game basis, he went from 15 to 36 receiving yards on a per game basis. He actually had over 600 receiving yards on the season. Now, if you're looking at the points per game, you're not going to see Cole Kmet popping off the screen. But what do we look for? Do we look for underlying volume, or do we look for touchdown efficiency for these players this upcoming season? We look for that underlying volume to carry over. And with Cole Kmet, he had no touchdowns this past year. And I know that a lot of people want to see that as a bad thing. If anything, I see it as a good thing in his future projections. Because with Kmet here, this is a tight end that came out, and yes, this is a tight end premium format, so it's a little bit different, but I think everybody at this point is playing in a league where you get 1.5 per receptions for the tight end position. He was a low-end tight end 2 his second season at an incredibly young age with no touchdowns. He was only 22 years old this year. At 22 years old, if you can be a top 24 tight end with no touchdowns, I'm going to take notice, especially if you're looking at Jimmy Graham. Jimmy Graham is no longer going to be in Chicago this upcoming season. With Jimmy Graham, this has been a player over the past 2 years, has been that red zone threat where he had 3 touchdowns this past season, 8 touchdowns the year previous. So he's taken 11 touchdowns over the past 2 seasons away from Cole Kmet. With no Jimmy Graham, you're not only going to see the natural progression from a young tight end that you shouldn't expect to break out until 24, 25 anyways, but at the same time, you're actually going to get the added on role in the red zone. And with this Chicago Bears offense, they're no longer going to have Allen Allen Robinson. They don't have a first-round pick in this year's draft class. They don't have that 7th pick overall, which would be so useful for them to be able to go and draft Garrett Wilson, Drake London, Treylon Burks. No, they're not going to have that pick, so they are going to be in a very desperate mode of trying to bring in pass catchers. Cole Kmet is going to be the second best option in this offense, only behind Darnell Mooney. So I think with Kmet, I mean, if you're looking at our dynasty ranking of him, he's 22 years old. I feel like this isn't even that aggressive. I have him neck and neck with Dawson Knox as tight end 10, tight end 11. And if you're looking at his ADP right now, I mean, he's the tight end 13. He's going behind someone like Mike Gesicki. He is, I mean, going 30 picks behind Dalton Schultz. I actually really like this value you're getting with Cole Kmet. Okay, now let's go over to an upcoming free agent, and let's before we actually talk about him, let's get back into a time machine. Let's pretend we're going back to 2017. And this is the same draft class that you have George Kittle. And how many people were talking about George Kittle in this draft class? I'll tell you, very few. Now, he was an intriguing late 3rd round pick. Sometimes people are getting him in the 4th round of rookie drafts. But the reason nobody was talking George Kittle is because there were some elite level tight end prospects. And I'm talking elite level tight end prospects that were going ahead of players like Alvin Kamara and Kareem Hunt. And one of these guys, I'm not going to lie, I may have drafted him over Kareem Hunt a couple times. David Njoku. David Njoku coming out of Miami. He wasn't as good as Kyle Pitts. Of course, no prospect has ever been as good as Kyle Pitts. But he was a 20-year-old size-adjusted freak when you were looking at his athletic profile that broke out his 2nd season at Miami and just looked the entire part of a tight end that was going to turn into a dominant receiving option at the next level. Now with David Njoku, he gets there and he was only 20 years old when he was drafted. Right now, David Njoku is only 25. Compare this to George Kittle in that same draft class that's going to turn 29 this upcoming season. I know that you probably don't believe me, but Thomas, please throw it up on the screen. Right now, George Kittle, 28. David Njoku, 25. So don't think that David Njoku failing in Cleveland was everything, because we've seen this story play out before. We've seen the incredibly young tight end that gets probably definitely too hyped too early and then doesn't really do anything his rookie contract on historically a very bad NFL franchise at developing talent, and he finds success with a second team. This former player was Eric Ebron. And I see a lot of parallels here with David Njoku. Now, what is so telling with David Njoku is how his situation has changed from a year-to-year standpoint, just time and time again. I mean, David Njoku, I can't even count. I can't remember off the top of my head how many coaching staffs David Njoku has played with. I mean, how the general manager is no longer there. Believe the 2nd season after David Njoku's career, he is shipped out of Cleveland. Coaching staff shipped out of Cleveland. They decide to go out there, draft Harrison Bryant in the 4th round. They pay a ridiculous amount of money for Austin Hooper in terms of just guaranteed money as well coming over from Atlanta. And despite all this, you still get flashes of that athleticism from David Njoku. Now, not saying that David Njoku all of a sudden is going to turn into the top 3 dynasty tight end I thought he would once be. I'm telling you right now, if you go back and you go to 2017, I am a freshman in college, and you say, Mason, hey, the year's 2022. What do you think's happening right now from an NFL standpoint with the tight end landscape? Who do you think the tight end 1 in Dynasty is? Who do you think the tight end 2 in Dynasty is? I'd probably tell you, I don't know if is 1 David Njoku or is that OJ Howard? Like I wouldn't know. Like David Njoku, I believe I could be biased here. Definitely could be biased. But right now, if you're looking at his DLF ADP, the tight end 27 behind Robert Tonyan. Obviously, Robert Tonyan, bad injury this past year, but this is a tight end that was just fueled off of legitimately only touchdown efficiency. Any smart person ever knew that Robert Tonyan was a bad draft pick this past season. If you're looking at Robert Tonyan's situation going forward, I mean, this is a player that doesn't have a contract this upcoming season. Now, another thing is Don't even know if he were to go back to Green Bay, if he's going to have Aaron Rodgers. Like, give me David Njoku. Give me the upside that you have with the size, with the athletic profile, with the flashes we have seen. I mean, going back to his second season with David Njoku, I believe that was the year that he did flash, and he actually saw his dynasty value rise in that second season. Let me double check. But yeah, he was 21 years old, and he had 88 targets that year, 56 receptions, and 639 receiving yards before getting injured in year 3 in 2019. And then they go out of their way and draft Harrison Bryant in 2020 and sign Austin Hooper. So I don't think David Njoku really ever got a fair shot in Cleveland. And let's stay in Cleveland, because I think with the departure of David Njoku, you should get some targets opening up for Harrison Bryant. And Harrison Bryant is an option that I didn't really love coming out of that 2020 draft class. I didn't think that he was a fantastic prospect by any means. But if you look at how he was able to actually get on the field right away in Cleveland, especially given the money that they gave Austin Hooper, as well as the investment that they had into what I want to believe is a very talented player in David Njoku. I mean, Harrison Bryant's rookie season and sophomore year, they were pretty impressive from an NFL standpoint. To go along with this, there's a real chance that you actually have Harrison Bryant as a player this team almost has to lean on this upcoming season. Because as we've already discussed, you're going to get David Njoku leaving this offense. Not to mention that right now, Jarvis Landry also is probably on the way out, because this team can save $15 million by cutting Jarvis Landry. Now, sadly, I mean, if you're a Harrison Bryant owner, you're still going to be dealing with Austin Hooper, I believe. I mean, if I'm reading this correctly, they could only save $2 million by deciding to cut and move on from Austin Hooper this offseason. That's not going to happen. They're going to hold on to Austin Hooper from here, but there's almost a guaranteed chance that they decide to save the $6 million in 2023, move on from Austin Hooper then, and all of a sudden, you're looking at a Cleveland Browns offense that won't have David Njoku, that won't have Austin Hooper, and all of a sudden, I mean, a player that flashed as a rookie tight end, which never happens. It never happens, not to mention the depth chart in the tight ends that he was battling with. I think that you could actually have Harrison Bryant as a somewhat intriguing play in Cleveland. Now, I think that's it. I guess we could go talk about one deep option. Harrison Bryant was already deep, so I guess we can do another one. We can talk about Donald Parham here. Now, Parham was not necessarily a tight end that I loved this past season. I know a lot of people from a best ball perspective wanted to say that he was a great option. I didn't necessarily see it. Of course, he had a pretty significant injury at the same time. But right now, if Donald Parham is able to make it back to Los Angeles, this is one thing we have to pay attention to, because he is currently not under contract this upcoming season. I think that there's a ton of upside here, because obviously you have the case of the size, the athleticism, all the reasons that people were excited about him coming into this season. But if we're talking about situations changing, this is a tight end that's going to be 24 years old. So he's right in this range. You don't expect these tight ends to be productive right away. You don't expect them to be productive at 21, 22, 23. So he's going to be entering that time where you expect your guys to break out, and you have Jared Cook leaving this offense. I mean, think about the trends we're seeing here. Jared Cook leaving Los Angeles, David Njoku leaving Cleveland. I mean, you can even throw Jimmy Graham leaving Chicago onto that list. I think that Donald Parham could also be an intriguing play if you have an uncertain situation in Los Angeles. I would be surprised if they don't at least pursue Donald Parham if he is healthy this offseason, given the changing players, at least from a personnel package standpoint, they could have not only Jared Cook, but at the same time, potentially no Jalen Guyton and or Mike Williams. And obviously, playing alongside one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL isn't going to hurt either. So I think Parham would be a player I'd be interested in. But thank you so much for being a part of the flock and supporting the channel. Really hope that y'all enjoyed this video. Really hope that y'all got something from it. And I hope that we get to see you out with the video tomorrow as well.